You know, for over a century, there was this one single idea that shook the Catholic Church right to its core. It ended up pitting popes against kings and even believers against their own faith. It was really a battle over the very nature of God, and it created what some people call the heresy of fear. Today, we're diving deep into Jansenism.
It sounds like a total contradiction, doesn't it? A Christian movement that somehow made people terrified of God's mercy. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. So, to figure out how we got there, we've got to start at the very beginning.
To really get a handle on this heresy, you have to start with its #1 defining feature, this incredible, almost suffocating strictness that just seeped into every single aspect of the faith.
So, Jansenism. Where does that name even come from? Well, it's from a guy named Cornelius Jansen, who was a bishop of Ypres. Now, he died within the church, but his book, Augustinus, which was published after he died, unleashed this really powerful and frankly dangerous movement that was all built on an incredibly strict vision of faith.
And right here, this is the crucial mistake that everything else grows out of. See, Jansenists believed that after the fall of Adam, humanity basically lost its free will. In their view, you weren't truly free anymore to choose good or to have any real part in your own salvation.
So, what happens when you just take free will out of the equation entirely? Well, you end up with a very, very different and honestly a pretty frightening picture of God.
This logic is like a total domino effect. It all kicks off with losing free will. If you can't choose, then you're just kind of swept along, either by God's irresistible grace or by your own fallen nature. And this leads to a really terrifying conclusion. If grace is irresistible, but not everyone is saved, well then it must only be for a predestined few. The result for the average believer was a life of extreme rigor, just driven by this constant fear that they might not be one of the chosen one.
You know, even the brilliant philosopher Blaise Pascal, who was actually deeply involved with the Jansenists, he saw the horror in this worldview. He called their God the cruel God of Calvin. That really captures the terror of believing in a God who would condemn you for sins you had literally no power to stop committing.
And this wasn't just some abstract theological debate, you know? It had devastating spiritual consequences. God got twisted into this figure of pure fear, and it just caused believers to despair. People became so afraid of being unworthy that they actually stopped receiving communion. And on top of all that, the movement's sneaky evasiveness challenged the Pope's authority, threatening the very unity of the Church.
So, faced with a heresy that was threatening to hollow out the faith from the inside, the Church began a really long and difficult fight to set these things right.
And let me tell you, this was a marathon, not a sprint. Just look at this timeline. We're talking about a struggle that lasted for nearly 70 years. Popes kept issuing condemnations, starting with 5 key Jansenist ideas way back in 1653. But every single time the Church acted, the movement found these clever new ways to sidestep the rulings, which just forced even stronger responses.
This right here was their most famous trick. The Jansenists created this split between what they called droit, or the right, and fait, the fact. So they'd say, okay, we agree with the Pope on the draw. Those 5 things you condemned, yeah, they're heretical, you're right. But then they'd immediately pivot to the fait and say, we just deny that those ideas are actually in Jansen's book. It was a masterclass in mental gymnastics, a way to technically obey the Pope while completely disobeying in spirit.
The conflict wasn't just religious, it got political, fast. King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, he saw Jansenism as a direct threat to his own absolute power. So he teamed up with the popes. First, he forced people to take oaths to root out the heresy. And when that wasn't enough, he took a really drastic step. In a massive show of force, he ordered the complete demolition of Port Royal, the convent that was the absolute intellectual and spiritual heart of the whole movement.
But here's the thing. Condemnations and demolitions weren't really enough. To truly defeat an idea of fear, the Church had to come back with an overwhelming idea of love.
This slide just lays it out so clearly. It's the ultimate contrast. Where Jansenism saw this cold, relentless judge, the Church presented a God whose love for humanity is just so immense, it's often not even returned. Where Jansenism saw salvation only for a tiny few, the Church insisted that mercy is for absolutely everyone. It all came down to a simple choice: fear versus love.
The Church's spiritual response to this was, frankly, brilliant. It had 2 main parts. First, they promoted devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. This devotion gave people a powerful image of Christ's heart, just burning with a merciful and suffering love for all of humanity. Second, the Church started encouraging frequent communion, which directly fought that Jansenist idea that you had to be basically perfect to even approach the altar.
This just sums it all up so beautifully.
The Church's response wasn't just to argue against the cold, hard logic of Jansenism, but to melt it. It was like taking a frozen heart, one that's been locked up by fear, and turning it toward the blazing hearth of God's infinite love. The fear just couldn't survive that warmth.
Okay, so the heresy was defeated, but did it really just disappear? Or does its spirit, does its ghost still linger today? I mean, historically, the movement was pretty much stamped out by the mid-1700s. There's just a tiny little sect that survived in Holland. But an idea that powerful doesn't just vanish. Its spirit, its tendencies, they can pop up again in new forms.
And we can still see these echoes today. I mean, think about any spirituality that treats the physical body like it's a prison for the soul. That's a kind of Gnostic dualism. Or an extreme moral strictness that leaves zero room for mercy or human weakness. Even that same kind of duplicity, pretending to be faithful while secretly undermining core teachings. That stuff keeps showing up. These are all the modern ghosts of Jansenism.
So, at the end of the day, why does any of this matter? Well, understanding Jansenism isn't just a history lesson. It's a powerful reminder of why protecting the true image of God as a loving Father is so important. It shows us how crucial the Pope is for keeping the Church together. And honestly, it equips all of us to recognize these same old errors of fear and rigor when they show up again in new clothes.
And that brings us to our final question, something for you to think about. When you really look at the world, at yourself, at God, what's the foundation of it all? Is it built on the cold, restrictive logic of fear, or is it built on the expansive, life-giving warmth of love?